Chapter 13. Reflecting. The voices from the kitchen followed Prudence as she walked towards the staircase. It had been almost a year since Lola had moved in with them. When she'd told Constance that she was going to get someone to help around the house, she'd been totally against the idea. She could manage, she'd said. Moreover, she didn't want any stranger running around in her house. She was used to her peace and quiet, and she didn't want anybody to come and disrupt it. Prudence had listened to her but had stood her ground. She had an apartment upstairs that needed cleaning, and she didn't have the time, interest, or the energy to expend on housework. When Prudence had finally moved in, Constance had left the cleaning of the upstairs to her. The tedium of that chore was getting on her last nerve, she'd told Constance, so whether or not she wanted somebody in the house, she wanted help. Whoever she got could stay upstairs out of her way, if that was what she wanted. Constance had flounced away as she usually did when she didn't get her way. Prudence had asked Rose if she knew anybody who would be willing to do little things around the house for her. Rose had suggested that her grandchild who lived in Port Antonio and who just left school would be perfect for the job. Prudence had worried about what Constance would say about her getting Rose's grandchild to stay with them. If she didn't like Rose, how would she treat her grandchild? Prudence had shaken off those thoughts. It was time for her to do something for herself. If Constance didn't like what she was about to do, that was her problem. So she'd negotiated with Rose about having Lola stay with her. Rose had said that she didn't have to pay Lola. Just give her what you are, you too good to we, already, she'd said. But Prudence was not one to accept charity, so she'd insisted on paying her and they'd agreed on a price. When Lola had first moved in, Constance would have nothing to do with her. She can work for you, she'd said. Make sure she stays out of my way. Her tone had threatened dire consequences if Lola had got in her way. There is nothing here for her to do and you gone to waste your money. It is yours, though, so you can do what you want to do with it. Constance had been right, Prudence had thought. It was her money and she would be damned if she wasn't going to use it the way she wanted. The first thing she'd done when Lola had moved in was to ask her to help her to sort out her apartment. With Lola's help, she'd transformed her storerooms, as Constance had called them, into bedrooms. They'd unpacked her barrels, stored the contents in their rightful places, and had distributed the barrels to friends and relatives who'd asked for them. She had enough around the house to catch water from the eaves when it rained. One moment Constance hadn't wanted anybody in her house. The next moment, she and Lola were the best of friends. Constance had done her best to ignore Lola, but Lola would not be ignored. So what you want me to do now, Aunt Constance? You shouldn't punish yourself. You work too hard. Make me help you. While Constance was protesting that she needed no help, Lola had taken over whatever she was doing, talking non-stop. After a while, Constance had stopped protesting and they would work together in the house, talking about everybody and everything that was happening in the community. Lola became the new sounding board for Constance, who regaled her with what Prudence called cock and bull stories about all the wicked people and the wickedness in the community. Prudence had expected Lola to laugh at the stories as she'd laughed at everything else, but she was a willing audience, adding to the stories and agreeing with them. Aunt Constance, I know what you're talking about. Wickedness everywhere. I can tell you about it, she'd say. Stop enabling Constance, Prudence often warned her. Agreeing with her foolishness. Because you don't know, Aunt Prudence. Because you don't know, Lola would say, before turning to Constance to exchange more stories of evil being committed by neighbors, and when they'd had enough of that subject, they'd made fun of the people who passed by on the road below the house. Prudence had watched them and had felt like an outsider while they joked about everyone and everything. She reached her bedroom and stood in the doorway glancing at the contents of her room. She'd kept one job for herself, and that was to tidy her room. She didn't like the idea of strangers, relatives or not, wandering around her private space. But she couldn't find the zeal to do much about her room, except to throw the bedspread back over the bed in the mornings. Bottles, paper, cards, and drinking glasses competed for space on her dresser. She'd get to them one day, she promised herself. She also needed to arrange her drawers and hang the clothes that she'd thrown into the wardrobe with the intention of hanging but had never got around to hanging. They'd have to wait for another day. Rob had always complained about her untidiness until she'd got tired of hearing about it. She'd given him his own quarters in the house to get away from his nagging. Her untidiness in her own room didn't bother her, so she didn't understand why it had bothered Rob. But Rob was a strange man, she'd always thought. He would painstakingly erase any smudge that he saw on any of the mirrors in the house. He'd wiped down all the furniture until they gleamed, and he'd always found more dust in the house after she'd already swept. And while she'd hung her clothing haphazardly in her wardrobe, over the arms of chairs or wherever had a hook, Rob had arranged his clothes in his wardrobe and drawers like they were on display. She'd admired and resented him at the same time. It was not like she hadn't tried. She'd always ensured that the living room, bathroom and kitchen were neat, just in case she'd had visitors. That was where she'd entertain them, not in her bedroom. Constance was the other one who nagged her about her room. Suppose you get sick and people come to visit you, what would they say? Prudence didn't care about what they would say. If they said anything to her, she would tell them what to do with their opinions. But they wouldn't say a thing to her face. They would go and spread her business in the community. Sometimes she wished her room looked like Constance's, the neatly made bed, the tidy dresser and chest of drawers, shoes nicely stacked on her shoe stand and everything coordinated. The only time that her room would look like Constance's, she told herself, was when she didn't live in it. She couldn't understand the purpose of having a room and not living in it. Why should she spread her bed and not sit on it or touch it for the whole day, except to straighten the sheets? She was not operating a furniture museum. So, just as she'd told Rob, so she'd told Constance. Stop bother me and go mind your own business. I like my room just the way it is. They never listened. And she'd had to learn to breathe when they'd bothered her. Constance and Rob were made for each other, she thought. It was a pity that they hadn't liked each other. Well, not Rob. She had a feeling that Constance was exactly the kind of woman that he'd wanted. Prudence had often seen his eyes linger on the fair-skinned, long-haired women that they knew. It hadn't mattered whether they were tall, short, thin or fat. But she was what he'd got. She'd not tied him to her, so he could have left at any time he'd wanted. He hadn't wanted to leave. Which other woman he would find who have house and treat him as well as me? Not one. If he could find one, he would have, she muttered. Prudence lay across her bed and wondered what Constance and Lola were talking about. She could hear indistinct laughter and chatter through the door which she'd left ajar. She missed her regular conversations with Constance, even the ones where she spoke nonsense. But since Lola had become her new sounding board, she'd had to take a step back.